welcome back to Autumn Leigh at Home. Today I'm just going to bring you along in my kitchen as we make a dinner+1 meal. So today we're going to make chicken pot pie, and I'm going to make one for dinner tonight and then one to put in the freezer for another night. I'll also show you how I make chicken broth at home as well as homemade biscuits to put on top of the chicken pot pie. So please follow along and we'll go ahead and get started. First step is making the chicken broth. So I'll go ahead and show you the footage for that now while I'm starting to tear off the chicken and get that ready to go. I'll show you that footage now, how I made the chicken and how I cooked it, as well as made the chicken broth that is now currently sitting right there cooling off. I got the chicken broth started first thing this morning because I wanted to give it a few hours of being able to boil and all the flavors to come out in order to be able to use the best and have the best chicken broth made. So I started off with taking a full chicken and if you can find organic, that's even better. My store was out of organic chicken, so I just had to go ahead and buy the one that was available. But if you can find that, that's great. But take the whole chicken, take the innards out and put them in the freezer bag with the rest of the freezer pieces that you'll see here in a little bit, and you can save them to make chicken broth again or chicken stock later on. Make sure there's at least a couple of inches of water above the chicken when you fill the pot and the chicken's inside, because this way, as the chicken is cooking down and the chicken stock is cooking down, you'll have enough in there and it won't dry out or go below where the chicken is because it creates steam. I used about a half a bag of baby carrots. And the great thing about making your own chicken stock or chicken broth, you can use as much or as little vegetables and different flavors of vegetables that you want, and as well as add salt or pepper to taste. I did not add any salt or pepper this time. I figured I could always add it later on in whatever recipe I'm using this in. So right now I just added half a bag of baby carrots, a few stalks of celery, and an onion, maybe about an onion and a half, to the water, and that's what gives the chicken stock flavor, as well as of course all the juices from cooking down the chicken. You know that the chicken broth or stock is finished when the chicken is falling off of the bones. So again, I just put the lid on, I put it on. Once it got to a boil, I turned the stove down to about medium or so, and just as long as it's still kind of lightly boiling, I went ahead and put the lid on and would check on it and stir it every once in a while just to make sure nothing was burning or sticking or anything like that, and it worked out great. So here you see I'm just taking the chicken back out, and I will save the chicken stock and / broth for another time and put them in jars in the fridge. Now comes the tedious part of separating the chicken from the bones. So this is the part that kind of takes a little bit longer. And if you have chicken breasts, you could just cook the chicken breasts and chop them up, or even leftover chicken would be fine. I wanted to do this because I got a whole chicken and cooked it earlier in the footage that you just saw. And I wanted to do that because I wanted to take the bones from the chicken and make some more chicken stock or chicken broth after I'm done cooking the chicken pot pie. So I'm saving, you may be asking what this bag is for. It's not to be thrown away. I'm actually planning to save it and stick it in the freezer for a different day so that I can make more chicken broth. I wanted to use the chicken broth I made from today. I probably will have some left over too, but I wanted to use that for today in our chicken pot pie. And again, I want to be able to use and make the chicken bones. So we're kind of doing the every bit counts challenge that everybody else is doing a little bit of. This is my way of trying that, and we're going to use the chicken bones as well as the chicken innards to make some more chicken broth and chicken stock later on. So if you have the bones, feel free to save them, stick them in the freezer until you have time on a different day to do it. If you happen to use chicken breast, that is fine too, or leftover chicken, you can make that and turn that into the chicken that you use for the chicken pot pie as well. Cooking, then working with the whole chicken can be a little intimidating, but as long as you don't mind getting your hands a little dirty, it really isn't that bad. When it comes down to bones or, uh-oh, I put it in the wrong spot. When it comes down to bones or anything like that, you can really tell what's bone and what's cartilage for the most part. And you just want to kind of feel around. Anything that feels super mushy, I just put it in here because again, it's not going to waste. We're turning it into bone broth. But there, once you get down and pick apart the bones, then sometimes you can come across pieces of chicken that feel kind of like fat-ish, and that's okay if you put it in here because that will give the chicken broth or chicken stock more flavor. So don't be afraid. Again, I know if you don't like getting your hands dirty, then this may not be the way to go, but feel free to cook the chicken and then just do your best practicing with it. Just make sure that you cool the chicken all the way down first before trying to take it apart, because you can burn your fingers if you try to take it apart right when it comes out of the pot, because you're bringing it out of boiling water and the chicken of course is super hot. So let it cool down first. You know that the chicken is done when you're cooking it, when the chicken is falling apart out and pretty much falling off the bone. So once you start seeing that, then you are ready to go ahead and take it off and let it cool. I'm still letting my chicken broth cool. Last time I made chicken broth and did this, I put them in mason jars in the freezer, and I had not apparently let them finish cooling, and every single mason jar cracked all the way through. So I not only lost my chicken broth, but I also lost about, I think, 10 or 11 quart-sized mason jars. So I was a little disappointed in myself. So you live, you learn, and now I've learned to let it fully cool before trying to freeze it. And I have ordered some plastic containers because I hear those do better. So I'm gonna try the plastic containers once they get here, and that's what I'm saving these for, is to make some more chicken broth to put in the freezer once I'm done, or even maybe try canning it. We may try canning it in our next video. We'll see how much it makes, but that would be fun to learn how to can it, because that means we have to practice pressure canning. All right, so now the time consuming part is over and the tedious part is over. We went ahead and separated our bone from our chicken, and this right here is gonna go in the freezer. So I'll put that in the freezer in just a moment. And then this is what you probably are more familiar with, just pieces of chicken. Again, if you have homemade chicken from leftovers or anything like that, that would work just fine as well. So go ahead and sit this aside and we'll come back to this in a little bit. Now we get started on our kind of like the roux and the inner filling of the chicken pot pie. So I'm gonna go ahead and grab my vegetables. I'm using garlic, onion, carrots, and I'm trying to think, that might be it. I'll take a look. I don't put potatoes in mine. I know a lot of people do, but I just don't like the texture of the potatoes in my chicken pot pie. So I typically stick, oh, peas, that's what it was. I typically stick with peas, carrots, onions, and garlic. And then of course we'll use the butter and flour and heavy whipping cream. And I kind of eyeball all of this. The fun part about chicken pot pie is you can kind of make it what you want. If you want to put celery in it, you can. If you want to put celery salt in it, you just make it the flavor that you want. So if you make this one that I'm teaching you, but you don't really care for the way it turns out just because of one thing that maybe I either left out or didn't leave out or put in or whatever, you can kind of make it your own. So I know some people put mushrooms in theirs as well. I am not a mushroom person, so I leave mushrooms out, and I know the rest of my family are completely fine with that as well. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and get started with my garlic, onions, and carrots. So the carrots, I am using canned carrots that I canned last year because I wanna go ahead and use some of these up. If you have fresh carrots, that's great. If you have canned carrots, that's fine too. With the fresh carrots, you wanna put them in at the same time as the onions. That way they can cook down. But because mine are already cooked and soft, I don't wanna put them in too soon. Otherwise they really all I'm doing with these is warming them up. I don't want to overcook them or make them too mushy. So I'll put those in probably right towards the end. But the carrots, if you're cooking them from fresh, then you want to make sure that you put them in when you put the onions in, and I'll show you that. So I'm using an elephant garlic. These things are massive. This is one garlic right here. Let me take a better look at it, but they're massive. So I'm gonna go ahead and use this up since I have it. If you have minced garlic in a jar, that's fine too. This is one of the things that we're gonna put in towards the beginning, and that way it can cook down. And then same thing with the peas. If you have canned peas, that's fine. Just know that they're kind of already soft. I'm gonna be doing frozen peas. And I'll put those in towards the end as well, just so they don't become super, super mushy. So we'll just go ahead and get started with preparing all of our onions and garlic. We don't like huge chunks of any of this, so I'm gonna chop it up, and then I have a little handheld blender that I'm going to use to chop it really fine. If you like chunks of onion in yours, then that's to taste. You do it how you want it. I just know that we don't typically eat it that way. This thing's massive. Look, this is one garlic clove. Can you believe that? Look how big that is. I'm hoping to plant some elephant garlic this November. I think it would be fun to see how it grows and see if we can get it to grow here where I live. So I'm gonna try it this November, but we won't know until next summer. These onions are gonna make my eyes water. Not a fan of cutting onions, they make my eyes water. All right, so this is what I was talking about. This is my handheld blender. It can mince things, and I love this thing. I use it all the time. It has a little blade in the middle of it, and it's wet because I just used it and washed it a minute ago. But you just put the blade in, and then all you have to do is throw all these pieces in here. I used about a medium-sized onion that was like 3/4, and my eyes are still watering. Woo. That is strong, one strong onion. All right, so I had a medium onion, and I just put about 3/4 of it in here, and then 2 of the large elephant garlics. See how much? I've only done it for a few minutes, and see how much it's already minced it. That's why I love this thing, because it's also not super bulky, so it's not like dragging out your entire blender just to do a few vegetables. All right. That looks good. So see how finely that's minced? That looks great. No big chunks, which is great. So I'm gonna go ahead and set this aside as well and clean up here a little bit, and then we'll get resituated over by the stove to get started on making the filling for our chicken pot pie. Okay, so I have my Kerrygold butter here, and I love this stuff. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna use 1 stick of butter because, again, I'm trying to make enough for more than one meal. And I'm gonna go ahead and get started with putting this in and cooking down my onions and my garlic. If you have carrots, I would go ahead and put, like raw carrots, if you have raw carrots that aren't cooked, I would go ahead and put those in here as well and have it all cooked down together, because the carrots could take a little while to cook. But since I'm doing the canned carrots, I'm just gonna start off with my garlic and my onion. On making the inside part of the chicken pot pie, and I'm going to use the chicken broth that I made earlier, and it calls for 3 cups of chicken broth. So we're going to go ahead and get started grabbing that, and I'm going to try to use this and just kind of fish it out. A little more than 3 cups, but that's okay, and I have a bunch left. So I'm going to go ahead and put this in here, and the great thing about this dish is that it's actually a 1-pot meal, so you can cook it all in 1 pot. Now I'm making mine into 2 different meals, one for tonight and one for in the freezer. But if you have a cast iron pot or one of these enameled cast iron pots, you're welcome to use that. If you don't, that is okay. You can still use a casserole dish and then maybe a different pot to cook it in. Both work great. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and get my flour, and I'm gonna put 4 tablespoons of flour inside the pot, and then that way I may put 5. We'll see, because again, I'm making more than you typically would, and you can kind of eyeball it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not like baking where it would mess the recipe up if you don't have the exact measurements. That's kind of the nice thing about cooking, is you kind of get to play with it and make it your own and to taste. So if I don't put enough flour, ultimately all that's going to happen is it's going to be a little runnier than if I were to put too much flour, it would be a little thicker. So I got my flour in there, and we're gonna put salt and some other seasonings. So salt, garlic powder, onion powder, and parsley. So if you wanna go ahead and pull those out. If you don't have one of them, again, don't panic. It won't make that big of a difference. It's not a big deal if you don't have one of them. Just use what you have. If you have fresh parsley, then that would be even better. But I don't right now, so I'm gonna go ahead and use this, and you'll just do 1 tablespoon of parsley, teaspoon of garlic powder, and a teaspoon of onion powder. And while this heats up and kind of comes up to a little bit of a boil, I don't want it to burn, so I just want to make sure I'm watching it and keeping a good eye on it. But as this heats up and gets pretty warm so the flour can get mixed in, I'm gonna go ahead and grab my carrots. Since I'm doing canned carrots, they're already soft. I just have to warm them up in here. Plus I want the flavors to kind of all get in there, and get my peas as well and chicken. And we'll go ahead and add everything back in here. So this is where you pull your chicken back out. I had mine in the fridge because I just didn't want it to go bad while I was finishing this. But if you work faster than me and can leave it out, that's fine too. But I went ahead and got my chicken in there and my carrots. And I might actually put 2 jars of carrots in there because this doesn't look like a whole lot of carrots. Yeah, I may add another jar, or at least another half a jar. And then I have my frozen peas here. We're gonna go ahead and pour these in. And you wanna do about a cup of peas. But if you have, like me, you're making more, you might need to do a little bit more than that. So I'm kind of overestimating all of my ingredients just because I wanna make enough to make 2 dinners. Since I'm already dirtying these dishes up, I might as well go ahead and make it into 2 meals. So it smells like Thanksgiving in here. That's what it smells like, especially when you cook the chicken in the chicken broth and make the chicken broth. My whole house has smelled like Thanksgiving all morning. That looks great. So we're gonna let this sit here and cook down and thicken up, and then we'll come back and we will work on finishing it up. I think I have all my ingredients in here except for salt and pepper. We are gonna add a good bit of salt to this just because when I made the chicken broth, I didn't add any salt or pepper to it. And I don't want you guys to be afraid. It's one of those meals that you can manage the amount of salt that you have in there. If you're making if you're making the chicken pot pie using store-bought chicken broth, then you don't want to add as much salt as I'm gonna add, just because the chicken broth that you buy from the store has a lot more salt to it. The chicken broth I made has no salt, and so we want to make sure we add a good bit of salt. But if you're on a diet that requires less salt, then that's the great thing about this meal, is you can control the amount of salt in your meal, because the chicken broth doesn't have any, the chicken we have doesn't have any salt, the vegetables. Now the carrots, canned carrots that I just poured in here from the jars that I had made, I did put a little bit of salt in those. But other than that, there's no salt, even from the frozen peas. So I'm gonna make sure I add my salt into this just to taste, and pepper as well, and then we should be good. It should be thickening up. And we also need to add our whipping cream as well. And I was able to use 2 home canned carrot jars, which is exciting. And we're using a lot of homemade stuff, which is great. Okay, so I went ahead and let this kind of cook down a little bit. That way it kind of was able to thicken up a little bit since I had that flour in there. And now I'm gonna add my salt. The recipe that I'm kind of going by, it calls for 3 tablespoons of salt, and she used her own homemade chicken broth as well. So I trust that. So I'm gonna start off with that. If I need to add some more, I can. But I'm gonna go ahead and do, I don't know if I said tablespoon or teaspoon, but I'm gonna go ahead and do 3 teaspoons of salt, and then we'll see what it tastes like afterwards. Now, I know I'm kind of all over the place with my measurements, so I'll try to kind of recap the measurements towards the end, because I've been adding a little bit more than the recipe called for, but I'll go based off of the recipe that I'm using, and then you, like I did, you can kind of veer off if you feel like you would like to. I'm doing it more to taste and what I feel like my family would like, as well as the fact that I'm kind of increasing everything as far as doubling the recipe a little bit. Not doubling, but I'm increasing and being heavy-handed in all of the recipes. So if you want to have, if you're a person that likes numbers and likes to go by based off of a recipe, I'll link the one that I used below, and it's from Farmhouse on Boone, her chicken pot pie. She does hers using sourdough biscuits, and I'm not going to do sourdough biscuits. I'm just going to do regular. So if you have a sourdough starter and you want to try to do the biscuits from scratch, you can. I'm going to do just regular biscuits using a 3-ingredient recipe that my husband grew up on, and I can show you guys how I do that here in a moment. But for now, I got the salt in here. Now I'm gonna add the heavy whipping cream. The recipe calls for half a cup of heavy whipping cream. And again, I'm gonna be heavy-handed, meaning I'm going to add more than the recipe calls for, just because I know I've pretty much done that with all the other ingredients, and that way I can make extra to make a dinner plus one. So this is the heavy whipping cream I'm using, nothing special, just store-bought. If you have fresh, then by all means use it. So I used about 3/4 a cup of heavy whipping cream, and I can always add more if I need to. And I'm just gonna stir all this in and let it simmer and cook together and cook down together. And then we have our chicken pot pie filling. I'm linking the Farmhouse on Boone recipe down below, but that way you can measure if you want to measure and compare mine against hers. But what I used in this to make the inner filling is 4 cups of chicken broth, 6 tablespoons of flour, 1 tablespoon of parsley, 2 teaspoons of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of onion powder, 5 teaspoons of salt, 3/4 a cup of heavy whipping cream, as well as a little splash of pepper. This looks fantastic. I don't know if you can see it well, but look how pretty that is. It's nice and creamy looking too, which is great. All right, I may let this cook down together just a little bit because I want to see it thicken up a little bit more. And I'm sure it will once it sits on the stove for a little bit, because the cream I just put in there was cold, so it's going to take it a few minutes to do that. So while I'm doing this, I'm almost done with my filling. I'm going to push the pause button and go get my kids from school. Once I come back and get ready for dinner, I will go ahead and separate this into 2 different dishes. One's going to stay in this one because I am able to put this enameled cast iron Dutch oven into the oven, which is fantastic because it makes it a 1-pot meal or a 1-dish meal, which is great. But I'll make the biscuits when it's time for dinner, put the biscuits on here, stick it in the oven and bake it, and then we'll have our dinner ready. Now for the freezer meal, so the dinner plus one, so I'm making enough to make 2 of these. That one I'm not gonna put biscuits on yet. Whenever it's time for dinner or time to use that one, I'll make the biscuits, or even use canned biscuits, whatever's gonna be easiest that day. I'll do that day, and I'll put this in the freezer just as the pie filling in the dish that I'm gonna cook it in. So whatever I can, like a casserole dish that you can stick in the oven, you'll put it in there, and then when it's time to, say you're super busy and you want to have a home cooked meal, you pull it out of the freezer, put the biscuits on top, stick it back in the oven, cook it for however long the biscuits require, as well as just to heat up the filling, and you're good to go. So it's a great meal to have as a dinner plus one. We are back from school, and it's now time to go ahead and make our homemade biscuits. This is a recipe that my husband grew up on, and it requires only 3 ingredients, and that's self-rising flour, Crisco, as well as milk or buttermilk. We didn't have buttermilk today, so I just used regular whole milk. And right here I am doing about, I think it's 3 or 4 cups of flour. 4 cups of flour. I'm doing 4 cups of flour, self-rising flour, and then about a cup of Crisco and about a cup and a half of milk. Now, you want the consistency of dough, kind of like Play-Doh is about the consistency that you want. So as long as you have that consistency, I would just keep adding a little bit of milk. If you don't have it, say it's too dry, add a little bit more milk. If it's too wet, add a little bit more self-rising flour. But once you have the mixture, you're just going to mix it all up with your hands. and form it into a dough so that you can roll it out and cut it into biscuit pieces. Now I'm going to use a biscuit cutter, but if you have a lid of some sort or even a cup, you can use a cup to cut out your biscuits. It doesn't have to be the perfect size. These are just going to be gently placed on top of the pot pie, the chicken pot pie filling. While I'm getting everything ready for the next step, I do want to take this time to talk through the difference between chicken stock and chicken broth. I had to look it up just because I wasn't really sure, and I know I kind of was using those words interchangeably. However, there is a difference, and so this is one of those one step, you learn something new every day, and this is one of the things that I learned new, and I wanted to share it with you guys. After looking it up, chicken stock is when you boil the chicken bones and you can have vegetables and stuff in it. Chicken broth is when you take, like what I did, and you took chicken bones that still have the meat on it. So like a whole chicken is what I boiled up and had vegetables in. That's what makes chicken broth, and that's the difference between the two. Is one, you use more meat on the bones to make the chicken broth, as well as chicken stock. And then chicken stock is the one where you take just the bones and you boil those down for a while, and that gives you the difference between the two. So today we are actually making chicken broth, and next time it will be more like chicken stock. I separated my two dishes, so now I took half of what was in this this Dutch oven, and put half of it into a casserole dish, wrapped it up with aluminum foil, then cling wrap, and wrote on top of it what it is, and stuck it in the freezer. And now I'm taking the other half of it, and it is time to roll out our dough for our biscuits as well as cut it. And I have my little helper here, and she is helping cut out those biscuits. And all we do, in this video and at the time of cooking this dinner and making it, I put the biscuits on directly on top before putting it in the oven. Looking back on it, it had been a little while since I had made this dish, and looking back on it, I think next time I might cook the biscuits a little bit before putting them onto the filling, the chicken pot pie filling, because that way it took a lot longer for these to cook. I put these in the oven at 375 for about 25-ish minutes. However, I think it would take less time if I had done it a different way. So I think that if you cook the biscuits a little bit ahead of time, that might be the best route to do it. And then it would take less time to finish cooking it and wouldn't take quite as long. It just took a while for the inside of the biscuits to get made. Hey guys, it's the end of the day and we are finished making our chicken pot pie. Today we were able to make dinner for the family as well as make one for another night when life just gets crazy and we don't have time to cook that home cooked scratch meal, but we were able to today. So I took the time to go ahead and make extra. I hope that trick helps you guys. I don't always have the time to do the big batch freezer meals where you make 30 or 40, and I don't always have the freezer space. So this is kind of my way of doing the same thing but in a different way, where we get to, whenever you do have the time to cook a dinner, just make an extra amount, because that way you already have the dirty dishes. There really isn't any extra dishes that you're doing or extra time that you're spending. So by doing that, you get to make 2 dinners and save yourself the hassle of getting to do one later on. But we were also able to use some canned carrots that I had canned previously, as well as make chicken broth and biscuits from scratch and do all of those things, which is fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me and taking time out of your busy day to learn with me as we grow in our skills of cooking, and give yourself time and grace to learn those new skills and just learn one thing at a time. And again, you will eventually look back and see, man, I have learned so much. But I hope that you guys have a great day, and I will see you next time.